That thought of us encountering Jesus, I want to carry that thought on into our sermon today as we think about what that means. We've been looking at the Gospel of John this month. The next week we'll start into the book of Acts as we continue our journey through the Word of God this year, seeking true north, seeking God's direction, trying to follow His lead, keeping us on the path of leading us to where He wants us to be. And the Gospel of John has been a great book. It's been a book where we've looked at really the heart of Jesus. It's a little bit different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke in that the heart of Jesus comes out in different ways. The Gospel of John, half of it is spent just on the last week of the life of Jesus Himself. We spent last week looking at John 17, that night when Jesus was gathered in His upper room with the disciples there. They shared that Passover meal, and then Jesus breaks into this prayer. And we're going to talk about that prayer a little bit later on just as a reminder. But what we're going to look at today is chapter 21, the final chapter of the Gospel of John. And I think it's important to kind of understand what's happened between these two events. Jesus goes out from the garden, or goes out from the upper room that night. He goes into the Garden of Gethsemane. He's arrested there. He's betrayed by John. He's dragged before the Sanhedrin. He's dragged before the council, before Pontius Pilate. He is given a mockery of a trial. He's humiliated, he's beaten, he's whipped, he's stripped down, he's paraded through Jerusalem out to Golgotha where he's crucified, and he hangs there until he dies, and they take him and they bury him. And 3 days later, he comes out of the grave. Then he begins appearing to his disciples. Once he appears to his disciples in the upper room, and Thomas wasn't there. And a couple of days later, he appears again, and Thomas is there. And you remember that encounter? Thomas says, until I feel put my hands in the nail prints, I won't believe. And then Thomas finally comes to that realization. Now, what's interesting, it seems to be that Jesus would appear to his disciples and then he would leave again. He wouldn't stay with them that whole time. And what happens in John chapter 21, as John finishes out his gospel, is one final encounter with Jesus. And I want us to look at this encounter today. There's some simple things, simple events that kind of create the outline for this chapter. And they're centered around fishing and food and following. Three things that we are all familiar with on different levels. But as I looked at these events, it kind of hit me that each one of these events, there was something that was going on surrounding those things that gives a deeper meaning and something for us to reflect on. So I want you to think about that, encountering. What does it mean to have an encounter with Jesus? What did it mean to the disciples? What can it mean for us as we live our lives? So grab your Bibles, open to John 21, or grab the little pew Bible there in front of you and turn to page 99 and just follow along or listen as we hear this story unfold. And the first thing I want us to think about is opening our eyes to see Jesus. John 21 verse 1 starts this way. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. That is the Sea of Galilee. Now what's marked about that is that all the other appearances we read about happened down in around Jerusalem, okay? So now we don't know how long. It just says afterward. The disciples had left Jerusalem. They had gone back to their familiar town, their homes probably, and they were sitting there on the side of this sea that they knew very well, the Sea of Galilee, or the Sea of Tiberias, same name. It happened this way. Verse 2, Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and the two other disciples were together. And if you count that up real quick, that's not all 11 of them that were left, but I think it's about 7 out of the 11 were there. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, got into a boat, but that night they caught nothing. And early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but his disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, have you any fish? No, they answered. He said, well, throw your net out on the right side of the boat and you'll find some. And when they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It's the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. And the other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. So I want you to kind of get the scene there of this encounter with Jesus. That picture there, the guys are out on the boat, they're doing their thing, and this guy, and they don't know who it is, just, "Hey, you have any fish?" They said, "Nope, been fishing all night, haven't caught a thing." "Well, throw it on the other side and you'll get some." And they did. And then this whole scene begins to unfold. But it started with, as I thought about it, they were there on the seaside, and I just get the picture of the guys sitting around a campfire, just kind of talking. Maybe they're talking about, what do we do now? It's been a while since we've seen Jesus. He told us what do we do? Maybe they had that moment of silence. Maybe you've been there on a campfire and all you hear is the crackling of the fire and maybe some of the insects and the trees around you. And then all of a sudden Peter blurts out, like he was very good at doing, said, "Well, I'm going to go fishing." And all the rest of them said, "Well, that's a good idea. We'll go with you." It's like, we don't have anything else to do. Let's just go fishing. So they jump into the boat with anticipation, as all fishermen do, and they found out they caught nothing. Until this guy comes along and says, "Hey, throw your nets on the other side." And they do, and they catch a bunch of fish. And then John, the writer of this gospel, says he realized who it was, and he said to Peter, "Peter, that's Jesus." And that's when Peter jumps in the water and swim. He must have been a fast swimmer. Did you notice it said the boat followed him? And it wasn't very far. It said it was 100 yards. Well, that would be a long way to swim for me. I know that. But anyway, they got up to shore and they began to encounter Jesus. I get to thinking about as I read the story, it reminded me of another similar story, only very different reactions. In Luke chapter 5, early in Jesus' ministry, Jesus was teaching one day, and he got in, it says, Peter's boat, and they backed off, and he taught from the boat. Now, let's say, why in the world would you do that? Well, I don't know if you've ever been out in the water, but water is a natural amplifier. It's like a natural sound system. And several times Jesus would go out on the boat away from shore and he would speak and people could hear what he had to say. So he's been doing that. At the end of that teaching session, he turns to Peter and says, "Hey, Peter, let's go fishing." And in Luke 5, the reaction's a lot different. He said, "Lord, we fished all night and didn't catch anything." And he almost mocks Jesus. And he said, "But because it's you that ask, we'll go." And they put out and they go and they throw out their nets, and lo and behold, they catch so many fish. They had to actually call another boat to come help them get all the fish in. And when, interesting reaction, Peter there, when the end of the story, he looks at Jesus and says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." And I couldn't help to think of the contrast between Luke 5 and John 21. Luke 5, Peter didn't know what to do when he encountered Jesus. John 21, he jumped in the water and full tilt pursued Jesus. I don't know what brought about the change, but my guess is there were several things that brought about the change. And his eyes had been opened, and his heart had been changed, and he came to a point where he knew he needed to pursue Jesus rather than hold Jesus off. I want you to ponder for a moment. Where are you at in your relationship with Jesus? Do you hold him off, or do you pursue him? I want to challenge you to think about opening your eyes to see Jesus. Last week we looked at John chapter 17. Two of the things we talked about in John 17 I thought were pretty remarkable was one, first thing we talked about was that Jesus prayed that we be protected. We talked about the heart of Jesus. You remember what he asked God? Protect them from what? The evil one. Because he knew it was going to be rough. He knew it was going to be hard. He knew it was not going to be an easy road for the disciples and those that would follow the disciples. And we see the heart of Jesus, and he just wanted to protect us. And he closes out that chapter by, Lord, may they be where you and I are. May they share in the glory that we share. And Jesus wanted us to be there with him for eternity. And that's just mind-boggling. So, when is the last time you've stopped and paused to open your eyes to encounter Jesus? It's so easy to get wrapped up in our life and our world and things going on. I don't know how many people that are retired have said to me, I don't know how I ever had time to work. I'm so busy now. So just because you're retired doesn't mean you don't have things to do. But take some time this week to stop and see Jesus standing on the shore and just standing there and wanting to have an encounter with you. You need to open your eyes to see Jesus. Second thing about this story is this. Share life with Jesus. Down in verse 9, the story goes on. It says, when they had landed, they saw a fire burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Now, where did Jesus get the fish? Well, if you're Jesus, you just go like that and it's there, all right? But it's interesting. He says in verse 10, Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. And Simon Peter climbed on board and dragged the net of the shore. And this next line tells me that Peter was a true fisherman, because this is what it says. It was full of large fish. Don't hear everybody bragging about their small fish. And 153 of them. He knew exactly how many he caught. Yeah, I caught 100. Well, see the pictures on my Facebook page. 153 large fish. But it goes on, it says, but even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. And none of the disciples dare ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came back and he took a bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. And this was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. It's an intimate picture. There's just something about sharing a meal that's just a special dynamic. None of us like to eat alone. There's no fun to eat alone when Judy and Heather are gone and I'm left to fend for myself. A lot of times I just don't even want to fix anything. It's hardly worth it. Then that's why I go out to eat when they're gone. But there's just something about sitting down, even if it's just with one other person, and sharing that meal. And here Jesus just simply, let's have breakfast together. And they shared life together. And this wasn't the first time. You remember the last time they'd had a meal together? It was that night in the Passover where they'd shared that meal together. And there again, I wonder if the disciples are having kind of flashbacks to, the last time we did this. I don't know if there was a sense of fear. It was interesting. It said none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Maybe they're remembering the encounter with Thomas. I don't know. They don't want to get in the same boat that Thomas found himself in. But none of them dared ask. It just says they knew that it was the Lord. I don't know if there was a sense of fear among them, a sense of awe, a sense of confusion, maybe a little bit of all of those things. And probably all of those emotions were valid at that point in that setting with that, confusion that, man, this is hard to get your head around, or wow, that is Jesus, or man, I'm not sure how this is all working. But they were sure of one thing. It was Jesus. And I don't know about you in your life, but there's different times in life that we're going to experience those different things. We're going to experience fear and awe and confusion and things like that. But in the midst of all of that, there's one thing we can always count on. Jesus is always the one to turn to. He is the one that does not change. He's the one that's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And I just want to challenge you to have that encounter with Him again. To take some time to just share life on a daily basis. To slow down, to listen, to see. I thought of this morning. I didn't have it in my sermon originally, but I'm going to share it. I've shared it before, but it's worth hearing again. It was a letter that someone gave me. I don't know where, but I know I kept it. And every now and then I need to read it and hear it again. And it simply says this: Dear friend, I just had to send you a note to tell you how much I love you and care for you. I saw you yesterday as you were talking with your friend, and I waited all day hoping you would talk with me. As evening came, I gave you a sunset to close your day and a breeze to rest you, and I waited. You never came. Sure, it hurts me, but I still love you because I'm your friend. I saw you fall asleep last night, and I longed to touch you, so I spilled moonlight on your face. Again, I waited, wanting to rush down so we could talk. I have so many gifts for you. You got up late and rushed off to work, and my tears were in the rain. Today you look so sad, so all alone. It makes me ache because I understand my friends let me down and hurt me many times also. But I love you. If you would only listen to me, I love you. I try to tell you in the blue sky and in the quiet green grass. I whisper it in the leaves and the trees and breathe it in the colors of flowers. I shout it to you in the mountain streams and give the birds love songs to sing. I clothe you with warm sunshine and sweeten the air with natural scents. My love for you is deeper than the ocean and bigger than the biggest want or need in your head. If you only knew how much I want to walk and talk with you. I know how hard it is on earth, I really know, and I want to help you. I want you to meet my Father. He wants to help you too. My Father is that way, you know. Just call me, ask me, talk with me. Please don't forget me. I have so much to share with you. All right. Okay, I won't bother you anymore. You're free to choose. It's your decision. I've chosen you, and because of this, I will wait and wait and wait and wait because I love you. Your friend, Jesus. Share life with Jesus. He wants to share life with you. One final thought as this episode, this encounter, has to do with following. In verses 15 through 19, this is what happened. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. And again Peter said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? And he answered, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. That verse 19, that final phrase, those final words are in the form of a command. In the Greek language, they have a verb form that's a command, and this is going to get you excited. It's a second person singular active imperative command. Doesn't that just knock your socks off? So what's the big deal about that? I'm no Greek scholar, but it just simply is this. It's an emphasis. It's like saying, hey, you need to follow me. That you is built into that word. You need to follow me. And he says this to Peter, and it's the last command he ever gives Peter. What does that mean? Maybe Peter was asking that question. What does that mean? I think he answered that question in the verses previous to that by his challenge to Peter. He said, Peter, here's some things that you need to understand. Following me means loving me with a sacrificial love. This passage has a play on words with that word love. Our English language, we have one word basically for love. The Greek language was different. There was three, and two of the three are used here. There was one, agape love, which meant sacrificial love, that you would do anything for the other person. And the other was brotherly love, phileo. You've heard of Philadelphia? It's the city of what? Brotherly love. That's where that comes from. So here is my translation of this passage. Like I said, I'm no scholar, but this shows you the play on words here. It says, Peter, do you love me with a sacrificial love, the agape love? And Peter said, yes, Lord, you know I love you like a brother, phileo love. And then Jesus asked again, Peter, do you love me with a sacrificial love, agape? Yes, Lord, you know I love you like a brother, phileo. And then the third time Jesus changes the words around and he says, and it's almost like it's a statement more than a question. It says, so Peter, you love me like a brother, phileo. And Peter says, yes, Lord, I love you like a brother. That third time, it's almost as if Jesus saying, you're not getting the point here, Peter. You're not really understanding what I'm asking of you. To follow me means a sacrificial love. And then he goes on to say, Peter, when you're a young boy, you dressed yourself and you went where you went. But when you're older, you're going to be dressed by others and they will take you where you don't want to go. And then John gives a commentary on that. He said this to indicate what type of death he would die. You see, Jesus knew that Peter would come to understand sacrificial love. Maybe he didn't right at that moment. Maybe he didn't right at that time. But church tradition tells us that Peter was sacrificed. He was martyred. In fact, he was crucified. They were going to crucify him just like Jesus was crucified. And he said, no, I'm not worthy to be sacrificed the same way of Jesus. And he requested that he be sacrificed or crucified upside down. And he came to understand what that sacrificial love is all about. See, following Jesus means hearing, listening. It means sometimes sacrificing, having that sacrificial love. But also following Jesus means to care for others. Did you catch what Jesus told Peter to do? 3 times. First and third time he says, feed my sheep and feed my lambs. Or he starts out with lambs, the little ones. Feed my lambs. And then the third time he says, feed my sheep. That word feed is significant because it is a term they would have understood. It meant it was the job of the shepherd to make sure they got to the right pasture land. Make sure they had enough grazing, the food, literally to take care of them. That's what Jesus is saying to Peter. Peter, make sure that my people, my children, have something that causes them to grow, something that helps them along the way. And then in the middle there, at the end of verse 16, he says, take care of my sheep. And that word take care is the word for shepherd. And Jesus used it to describe himself in John chapter 10, where he says, I am the good shepherd. My shepherd know who I am. They hear my voice and they follow me. It's the same word that the Apostle Paul uses when describing eldership and leadership in the church, to watch over, to shepherd the flock. And he's telling Peter, Peter, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility to care for people. You have a responsibility to take care of them. And part of following me is doing everything you can to help others be nourished and be taken care of by my Father. And for us, that same thing holds true. He calls us to follow Him. And that means that we need to care for others, that we need to be there, that we need to do what we can to make sure that we help others grow in the Lord. You know, one of the challenges of the church is facing today in our culture is that we're living in what they call the first post-Christian society. You go to a lot of places and it's becoming more and more. People are not interested in the church anymore. They're not interested in going to church. And we need to understand that it's not just about church, it's about having a relationship with God and a relationship with Jesus. And Peter is saying you've got to do whatever you can. That's why it's so important for us to, as a church, as a congregation, to see beyond the immediate, to see beyond what's directly in front of us. What are we going to do to feed His lambs so that they come to know who He is? What are we going to do to feed His sheep, to help others understand that it's God who gives what's needed? It's a big challenge. In fact, I think that following Jesus means being willing to grow in our faith. I looked up that word follow in the New Testament this week, and I noted all the times that it was connected with Jesus, and never once is it an easy connection. There's always a challenge to grow, to go to the next level. Listen, without going into a lot of detail on all these passages, Jesus continually calls and challenges His people to follow Him, and every time there's a decision involved, and it's a challenge to go to the next level. In Matthew chapter 4, He calls His disciples. He comes up to these guys and says, "Hey, guys, why don't you leave your nets here and come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And it was a call for action, a call for decision, to get out of what they were used to go and follow God, to do something they'd never done before. In Matthew chapter 8, some people came up to Jesus and said, "Jesus, we want to follow you." And Jesus said, "Okay, that's great." But one of them said, "Well, but I got to go do this." And the other said, "Well, I got to go do that." And the other said, "Well, I got to go do this." And Jesus basically says, none of your excuses hold water. You're either going to follow me or not. They had a decision to make. In Matthew chapter 10, He challenges the people, His disciples, as He sends them out. He says, "Take up your cross and follow me." And that word cross in the minds of the disciples would have brought terrible visions and images of what that meant. It was not a pleasant thing to take up a cross in the days of Roman domination. And He says, "Take up your cross and follow me." In Matthew chapter 19, a rich young ruler comes up to Jesus and says, "Jesus, I've been a pretty good guy. I've done this and this and this and this and this. What more do I need to do?" And He says, "Well, there's just one thing. Go sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Then come follow me." And Jesus got to the heart. That was the one thing He wasn't willing to let go of. And sometimes we're challenged to use our resources for the kingdom, and it's hard to let go of that. In Luke chapter 9, Jesus calls us to make a daily commitment to follow Him. Take up your cross daily. In John chapter 10, Jesus says that His sheep listen to His voice and follow Him. John 12, He says, if you want to follow Him, you must be a servant of others. Now, is there enough in that list to keep you busy for a couple hours? Yeah. How about a lifetime? Because Jesus' call to follow is never a call for mediocrity. It's never a call for laziness. It's never a call for going with the flow. It's a call to action. It's a call of faith. It's a call to step up and be the person that God wants you to be. And that is an amazing privilege to receive that call. It's a tough road sometimes to follow that call. But Jesus says, "I will be with you always, even to the end of this age." So it's my prayer that we'll be a gathering of believers that know what it is to believe. It's the way we started this whole series on John. What does it take for a believer to believe? And basically we said it takes believing in Him and then living that out. Where are you at today? Are you a believer that believes? Are willing to follow where He calls us to go? Let's pray.